Dani, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I am very excited to be here and be on the other side.
I know because it's very different. As you know,
It
because you
is.
have your own podcast, it's a lot of work. And it's so nice being on your side of the chair right now because once you're done in this hour or so, you're done.
And then it's kind of almost like this hazy excitement phase after when I finish an interview. I'm like, oh, that was so wonderful. I can't wait to listen to it again. And then a week or two will go by for editing and processing. Then I listen to it again and I'm just like astonished at the work that the other side does. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, what a well produced interview. Like it makes me so grateful. And then I kind of like come down from my high. I get to listen to it and then I'm like right back on my high again. I'm like, oh, this is
Because
great.
as you're answering the question, you almost like black out. Like you don't remember what we
Well, it's
actually
not
talked
just
about.
me.
Oh, no,
Sometimes
no,
I
no.
feel like that's just me. I answer questions. I'm like, I have no idea what I just said. I hope that made sense and things are
I remember being
aligning.
in job interviews like that and being like, I am literally just spewing keywords here, like buzzwords.
And I wonder if that's almost like a coping mechanism. Like your brain is trying to like protect you and reassure you you're okay.
Oh my God, I don't know. But hey, most of those interviews, I didn't get the job. So clearly, whatever I was doing didn't work.
Well, you don't remember it anyway. So, okay.
I literally don't. But speaking of jobs, I feel like you started a new job recently. No?
Yes, I did. I did. It feels like I've already been there for a year and it's only been 4 months.
Okay, well, you passed probation and whatnot.
Let's talk about probation
Yes,
because
I think it's good. No, you don't like probation? It's anxiety ridden.
I I have pros and cons with it, but I think what I noticed with this new position and this new job, mostly because of my age and my experience. So now I'm like 8 years into my event planning daytime career, and having a job now is just different. Your responsibilities are so much higher. You are so much more involved in the business. You are so much more involved in giving your opinion on subject matter. And what I really noticed with this time around and starting a new job, especially because my past job, I was there for 5 years. So I was
Mm.
pretty young when I started, but I really grew up at that company and learned a lot about myself. So coming into this position at this new job was the first time I truly felt like me. And that almost made this shift that much harder, but that much more exciting, but also that much better. It was a lot of confused emotions, definitely a lot of anxiety. But these 3 months of probation made me feel like every day I was in hypervigilant panic mode.
Yep. It's like hanging over your head.
Absolutely. And it's not like I was even essentially doing anything wrong or I was doing anything outside of my scope of work that they could look at and say, nope, sorry, this doesn't fit and terminate. There was nothing I was essentially doing, but I was in fight or flight every single day, thinking that if I didn't have this job, my life would be over. And
Many
this is
people
something
feel
that
that way.
bothers with me with probation periods is that fight or flight basically puts you into the sense of all of my value and all my self-worth is this job and nothing else matters. And
Mm.
I hate that about probation periods. It really makes us look at our careers as our only asset if maybe we don't have kids or we're not married or we don't own a house. Maybe all we have is our career, so to say. That probation period, when you start a new job, when that's all you have, me, I don't have kids, I'm not married, I don't have a house. Like, I am just me right now, and I'm content with that. But this probation period made me realize now that I'm so self aware and I've become myself and really stepped into myself, was that I used to put so much value into these jobs, and it was a direct mirror of my self worth.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not good for my mental health. That was not good for my well being. And then those 3 months were grueling, or even sometimes a year or 2 years, however long I was at that job, depending on really my relationship with people I even worked with.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really big struggle. And coming out of that now and being in this new position, I realized that that part of healing and my self-worth, I'm not done. I am nowhere
Ugh, are
near
we ever?
healing that. And I think also, I mean, I hate talking about COVID. I hate talking about the times. But when
And add the
you're,
extra stress because you're like, I don't know what this job market is like anymore.
and my job as an event planner is essentially
Mhm.
non-existent if people
Yep.
can't go to events and people don't want to host them online. So I had to also reevaluate my self-worth and the value I was putting into jobs when there wasn't an industry for me. And getting this new job, completing my 3 months, I was like, okay, now what? Now what am I gonna basically push my self-worth onto? Now what in this position can I look forward to and push and push and push instead of just enjoying the fact that I actually passed probation, that I'm doing a good job, and that yes, this is a great company, a great position, and I should value my time there. I really need to shift my mindset that if I didn't have this job, I wouldn't be of value to anybody.
It's
And
very scarcity mindset and it's hard to get out of.
it is so hard. I thought that I've been doing so well, that I've been healing, and that I've been working on so hard on myself. And then I kind of was met with this realization that maybe this is my downside. Maybe this is an extremely unfortunate toxic trait that I have, where because I'm not sure if I want kids, because yes, I would, I think, like to get married, I don't really have those things.
To look forward
And
to.
I am kind of just like, oh, all I have is a career. I'm just going to be that career woman. I'm going to be that boss and I'm going to thrive. Okay, that's
But if you're
fantastic.
worried about that, then I think it means that you want more.
Absolutely. And trying to have these conversations with yourself is kind of, you sometimes feel like you're on a roller coaster and you're going nowhere and just going in circles and circles and circles. And I'm kind of like, well, when is it going to end for me? Because fortunately, you go to work until you are financially stable enough where you're going to retire. And I was like, I need to really, really, really start to work through this now. So this isn't something that kind of looms over me and becomes a more serious toxic trait that maybe when I'm past my prime and I can't have kids anymore, now there's no going back and I can't find something to put my self worth into. And I'm desperately searching for anything to make me feel good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
You're
such a
not the only one that
process.
feels that way. I think
No,
a lot of women pick a lane. You're either a career woman or you're a family and kids type woman. And there's so many women don't think that they can have both, and you very much can. There's
absolutely.
millions of examples of it, you know?
Absolutely. And I admire the women who can juggle all of those things and still make sure that they have time for themselves as an individual and don't really lose themselves in trying to be the career woman and the dedicated mother. I look up to that so, 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 so much. And maybe also that is partially why I'm putting so much self worth
Mm-hmm.
into these things, is because that is what I'm looking at as like my top tier and on a pedestal.
Right.
And anything below that intensity isn't good enough for me.
Are you an Enneagram 3?
Apparently, I'm a two.
A 2. Okay, a 2 is like the helper and like
Mhm.
people pleaser and want to make sure everything's
People
okay, right?
pleaser. Yeah.
Isn't that like the bad parts of it?
Yep.
The
Oh, it
bad
is.
connotations.
Oh, it is. So going along with even just that, being a bit of a people pleaser,
The readily availableness all the time.
and am I even in this career for myself? Or am I just doing it to make other people feel good as an event planner? You know, you're planning their events and you're giving them a day essentially, or a week whenever the event is, to feel their best and do their best. I was like, well, is this me people pleasing 24/7 on a regular basis so that I get some kind of dopamine fix?
Seriously. Well, what do you think? What have you figured out so far?
I've
I know from
really
listening to your previous podcast episodes that you've been in therapy since you were 5, like in and out. So, I mean, you've done the work. So what have you learned?
I really obviously during the pandemic faced that fear that maybe I was just in events for other people and that it wasn't the career I was just meant to live my life in. And I realized that it doesn't have to be black and white like that. And
Exactly.
that's where my podcast came into play.
Mhm.
Was I have this very structured, organized side of me that event planning fit.
Mhm.
And it is so systematic and logistics and fantastic. And while I feel like I was looking at it in my lows as people pleasing, it really isn't. I can look at it now as I am helping them.
Mhm.
And in turn, there's nothing wrong with that giving me happiness.
Totally.
And instead of looking at it as a people pleasing mindset, I was able to shift that mindset into a someone else's happiness can make you happy as long as you ultimately are doing things that still make you happy that aren't just going to be based on other people.
Mhm.
So, what I needed to do was find something to fill that other side of me. And that was a podcast. That
Yeah.
was the total opposite of being very organized and logistical for business, really, and kind of like very corporate, and you had to fit a certain image. This podcast was vulnerability and honesty and emotion. And it was everything that you're not really supposed to be in business that I
Mhm.
needed to embody to feel
Mhm.
whole and feel fulfilled on a regular basis.
Mhm.
And finding that was kind of like I felt this part of me that never really got a time to shine finally is coming out.
Mhm.
And the pieces just started coming together. And I kind of just felt like, oh, that's Danielle, like that's Danny.
Right.
Instead of, I maybe felt for the first few years of my career, this is fulfilling, but something is missing. And even in my personal life, I kind of felt that I wasn't really getting the deeper connections as frequently as I would like.
Mm.
If I had it my way, every single person I talk to, I would be having real, deep, honest conversations with. Small talk is not my best forte, nothing.
Mhm.
I like the deep, the honest, crying if you really want to. That just makes me feel connected. And that
Mhm.
is something that I really value.
Yeah, I get that. And a podcast allows you to do that. I I have the gift of small talk. I make money through small talk. I work in real
Mhm.
estate. So being good at small talk is a great skill to have where I am. No one's gonna get too deep when you're working with clients and stuff. But I agree, it's nice being on because deep down I do like to talk a lot more. So I agree, being on a podcast gives you that avenue, and I've always loved it, and what I like about what you're saying is if we only ever have our 9 to 5 jobs or our careers, it's easy to get sucked in that way, but I know a podcast for me, and you probably feel the same way, it's that hobby that I didn't have. I didn't really ever have hobbies, like,
Mhm.
I played sports through high school, but, like, growing up, I didn't stick to, like, being on a volleyball team or a hockey team or anything like that, like, I I enjoy fitness, but I'm not, like, obsessed or not into any cult fitness. So, yeah, like, a podcast for me was something to have outside of work, and I can turn work off and have something else in my life, and I'm sure that's the way you feel too.
Absolutely. And it also comes back around with that to just having a hobby also kind of helps fill that imposter syndrome and it helps
Mhm.
fill that void of you putting your value in so many other things. So this was something that when you take every other aspect of your life and it is stripped away, what do you have?
Your thoughts, and that's a scary damn world.
Very, very, very scary. And what I
Mhm.
found out is I didn't really like myself that much. I knew deep down who I was, and I'm sure that I would grow to like her if I actually just let me be myself. And
Mhm.
I nourished that emotional and vulnerable and honest side of me that I used to care about, but I
Mhm.
was basically told was weak. And so I ignored it and I pushed it away. Now, I did the total opposite. I accepted it. I let it flourish. I would
Mhm.
nourish it and let it grow and just really balance out me because
Mhm.
that's what I needed. I don't need to be emotional 24/7 and have it almost feel overwhelming and like I can't keep up
Mhm.
because that is also very exhausting.
But you need your emotions to be okay.
And I just needed balance
Yeah.
between the two. And I needed to be okay with the fact that I was a person who felt a very vast range of emotions on a daily basis. And some people don't. And that's okay too.
Mhm. But that's draining to, like, live like that every single day, and especially trying to hold a job down and all that stuff. If you're going through that range of emotions and also in event planning, you're dealing with people at the height of their emotions. So then you're having to
Mhm.
manage theirs when maybe you're not even in the best, like, headspace. What types of events were you doing? Like corporate events?
So, right now, I am doing association events. So,
Cool.
essentially, a lot of it is corporate. I used to work at an event venue in Toronto and
Mhm.
do some of their weddings and socials as well. And I think that was too emotional
The
for me.
emotions are high, the
I,
pressure, the
s-
stress.
I say I want emotional. That wasn't the right kind of emotional that I could deal with, solely because I just felt so deeply for them. And when
Mhm.
their emotions were high, it was a little bit hard to separate business. So, weddings I've learned are maybe not my area of expertise. Maybe back
Mhm.
then, I
Yeah.
think I've grown enough as a person that I would be able to take the skills I've learned over the past 7, 8 years and apply them differently, especially now that I am letting my emotions out and
Mhm.
letting them have their time. I probably could manage it much better, but weddings are so stressful. And it takes away from the enjoyment
Mhm.
and the fun that is supposed to be this grand event, this wedding. I commend any wedding planners out there. You guys are superstars, seriously.
Yep. Like, they can handle anything. If you can handle wedding planning and handle the bride and the bride's mother, you can handle anything.
That was the hardest part.
The
It
bride's
was
mother.
always it was always the mothers. I would deal with brides who were so sweet and they just
Yeah.
wanted everything to go well and they were just happy if I was able to somehow get in an extra table at no cost.
Yeah.
The mothers, not so much. And I hate to say this, but it was mostly around money and the power that the people paying for the wedding felt.
Yeah.
And
It's
I
entitlement.
talk a lot about money and shame and
Mhm.
how I didn't grow up with money. And so now gaining money and really attaining it as an adult, it makes me uncomfortable.
I bet. And that really messes with, like, achieving and succeeding and thinking money is bad.
It does. And so then to be on the other side of it, where I get to work at these fancy venues and I get to see people throwing $50,000, $70,000 weddings,
And not blinking
I
an eye.
was crawling into my shell and I would just watch them fight and just be like, you have so much money at your disposal, and this is what you are choosing to fight on. It was really hard for me to wrap my head around kind of their perspective and their outlook and their priorities.
Well, I think if you didn't grow up with money, then you probably always and maybe if you had problems throughout your family was probably arguing about lack of money. So when you see a family with a ton of money and they're still fighting, you're like, what do you have to fight about? That's how I see it. But
And it
obviously
was hard to
everyone has their
watch.
own problems.
Absolutely. But when you're 21, 22, and you see that, you're just like, what could you possibly be upset about right
Yeah.
now? You
Like you have the
could.
beautiful wedding and everything paid for and no stress. And it's just like walk a mile in my shoes someday.
hmm I've come a long way from thinking like that and kind of that mindset of everything is my perspective and my perspective is the only
Mm,
perspective. And that's something that I've had to really work on. And there's kind of two sides of it.
hmm.
There's the side where people are very cocky and conceited and the world revolves around them. And then there's the people who are kind of shy and damaged and they don't really know any other perspective and they kind of have the mindset that the world around them is out to get them. So kind of like a victim mindset.
Hmm.
and having the difference between the two, especially in dating. If you ever try to pair two of those people up to date,
That is a cause for disaster.
it is. And your toxic traits just come flowing out. Like
Mm.
you can't stop them when you are mixed with two different very strong backgrounds like that.
Mhm.
It is, I would say, probably close to creating a trauma bond instantly.
100%.
I've talked so much about trauma bonds in the past like 2 months because it kind of became this topic for me where I was like, that's what that was for me 5 years ago,
Mhm.
6 years ago. Like that makes so much more sense now. But what it came down to was I didn't like myself in relationships.
Mm.
I mean, I just talked about it, how I wasn't really sure of myself until I became into this career. So, let alone trying to date when you don't know who you are,
Mhm.
I kind of
And what
came to
ages are we talking
terms.
about? Like all throughout your 20s?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
literally until the person that I'm dating now. But even so, that overlapped.
Yeah,
I
I
was
bet.
not all fixed and good to go by the time he and I started dating. I had so much work to still do. He just gave me the space, the
Mhm.
safe space to do so.
Which is
And
all
he
anyone
gave
ever
me
wants.
that was all I wanted. I just needed the calm, the cool, the collected, safe space for me to come to terms with a lot of my own bad behavior
Mm.
and how to not ever do them again. But that meant facing everything that I potentially had done or hurt people or anything that I just knew wasn't aligned with who I really was.
Mm.
And that's painful. Having to sit through and really reflect and go through that and accept your failures and accept your toxic traits.
Well, what are
That's
they for
the
you? Give me some
hardest.
examples.
I think with this relationship, what this one taught me the most was I was so used to chaos
Mm.
24/7 that this very self aware, calm person came into my life and scared me because I was always kind of told that's what healthy relationships would end up looking like, is that they would almost feel boring. And
And
anytime
being
things got
girls in our
boring,
20s, we don't want boring. I thought the most beautiful love is quite the opposite of boring.
my perception of love was complete chaos and passion. You can call it passion. I look at that and I'm just like, basically, you mean, fighting and making up every 15 minutes. For me, that's what it was, at least.
Literally.
But I had this very calm, self aware person come into my life and give me a safe space to work through everything. But unfortunately, that was going to be messy because of this calmness that made our relationship or our day to day life just seem a little boring.
Mm.
But when you're used to so many highs and lows on a regular basis, anything aside from that is going to feel boring. It's going to feel too calm for you. And you're going to nitpick and you're going to try to find
Something to react
something
to.
wrong. You're going to find something wrong, anything wrong. And if it's not there, you're going to make it up. You're going to make it happen and get a little
Yep.
bit of excitement into the relationship. And then it happens and you realize, I didn't want that. I actually didn't want that. Why would I do that? That was not what I wanted. And I think another one was constantly comparing.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I would say that is
Never experienced
probably
that.
extremely common for relationships because you're always taught to look at other relationships as examples. You
Mm.
look at movies and they're like, oh, isn't that romance? Isn't that relationship so beautiful and perfect? And you really get an opportunity to come up with what love is or what a relationship is for yourself. You already have these preconceived notions and expectations pushed down your throat when you're a preteen, teenager. Then when you actually start dating, you're kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. No one knows what they're doing. And that was supposed to kind of be the fun, that we weren't already supposed to have these set standards and expectations. And we were just supposed to live and meet and connect. But also through growing up and, social media advancing, the internet advancing, there's no room for just figuring it out as you go. It's like you already have to be this perfect embodiment of relationships and I know what I'm doing all the time. And it's already setting you up for failure in
Mhm.
dating.
And we feel
And it's
like we're in a
awful.
race with other relationships. We look at people like, oh, they've been together for 2 years and they're engaged, but my relationship I've been in is for 3 years and I'm not engaged. So what am I doing wrong? And it's like,
Hmm.
oh my God, you can't think like that, but it's so hard not to.
And I think that there is a point of comparison where you genuinely can look at a relationship and say, I like this about this. I like this about this. I don't like this about this. And that is perfectly healthy. But when you start to use those comparisons as excuses to start fights or as ammunition against your partner, that's when you're actually using a comparison for extremely selfish, not even selfish. It's like it's not even about you at that point. It's about a fantasy.
You're making up stories in your head.
Yeah. And I've definitely made those mistakes before. And I kind of had to learn how to navigate, okay, what is me comparing? Because I genuinely, fundamentally think that's something I need in a relationship versus I was just told that that is what everyone is supposed to do, but that doesn't actually align with who I am or my values. I'm just seeking it because apparently that's what everyone else is supposed to do. And you really need to learn your own balance between going with your heart and going with your head because they're going to take you in two different directions
Mhm.
in that instance, right?
And also going
Maybe
with what makes sense for you and your relationship and what you actually want compared to maybe you don't want what everyone else wants.
100%. And I think that's where your heart and head come into play.
Mhm.
Your heart is going to try so hard to steer you in the right direction, hopefully. This is why we need balance and harmony between the two because it wants you to feel those emotions and have all those great things. But when your brain has been programmed to look at your life as not enough because you see other people with more, what are you going to do? How do you rewire your brain to go back and stop thinking that? It's hard
How?
when
Or tell us. I'm waiting
think
for the answer.
so for me, like a matter of making your heart and head work together is stopping before you have your reactionary phase. So for me, I'm usually all heart and then sometimes my head comes into play, which also gets you in trouble. My partner is all head, all logic, and he
Mine too.
rarely lets his heart come into play. So what we learn from each other and that dynamic is invaluable of what we can take and learn in the relationship. But if you don't have someone to kind of be that brute force and be that opposing balance that you really need that can give you that balance, you need to learn really how to regulate your emotions. And the only way to learn how to regulate your emotions is to actually let yourself have them,
Yeah.
accept them, process them. And then if you find that you're a very reactionary person, you need to look out for at what point is enough enough? Like, when are you going to be willing to stop yourself and actually stop, process, and let yourself feel instead of blowing up and
Mhm.
causing a lot of drama potentially in your relationships too?
I'm reactionary. I'm getting better over the past years, but whew, sometimes you know that game Minesweeper? I see the landmine or whatever, and I run at it and I jump.
Hmm.
And I know what I'm doing in the moment I'm doing it, but I'm like, I need to prove this person wrong, and I need to make my point. I need to show them right now how they hurt me instead of just being like, not answering, not responding, and either coming back with a more thought out response or just not responding at all. The not responding at all has worked really well for me, or even leaving it for a full day and then responding later. It helps because the moments I answer things right away, it doesn't end up well.
No, and it's so important that if you're in a relationship that you want to last and you want to show each other respect, that you do think of your answers before you say them. If you
We
keep
think about the unconditional love. We think, oh, like they'll forgive me, like they understand where my intent is, but they don't. They're still another human. They don't know you like you know yourself. Even if you've been dating them for years, they're still another human being, you know?
and there's only so much we as humans can take.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a point where you need to be responsible and take accountability for continuously potentially reacting when you could have taken a moment and really processed and given your partner that respect. And it's so much easier said than done.
This is the advice I need to hear.
It is easier said than done. And I'm very proud of you for one being self-aware. You can say, "Yep, this is my trait. This is my issue. I am literally saying it out loud, making it more known so that I can listen and really take it in." That's usually people's first problem. It's the first step they're not willing to take. They're like, "I'm not willing to admit that I'm reactionary. It's all his fault. He's doing XYZ, or even she is doing XYZ to make me feel this way."
That's the biggest hump to get over first.
It is. It really, really is. But when you do, and you can actually have a conversation where you two communicate why you felt the way that you felt, and then all of a sudden, instead of you two at each other, it's the two of you against a problem and how you're going to solve it. You feel like you're unstoppable and you can do anything together. And it kind of solidifies your bond, and it makes it deeper, and it makes the love deeper. And it does make the love unconditional.
Mm-hmm. I I'm nodding because the times we've worked together on a problem instead of working against each other, yeah, it turns out a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
A
Mm-hmm.
lot better.
It
I
does.
want to ask you because I know you've mentioned before that when you do feel that the relationship is stable slash boring, then you self sabotage. Do you find in your current relationship you still have spurts of that, or is it getting a
Not
lot
right
better?
now. I feel like now I've become self-aware where I get almost a little bit antsy and I'm just like, kind of want to shake things up.
But what do you fill it with instead? Because I've been in that situation. I'm looking for it, and it comes from me being bored in my own life and picking fights.
Hmm. So, what I used to do was actually self-sabotage and do something that I know that the person would not like. I don't want to say approve of because that's terrible
I get
terminology.
what
They
you're
don't need to
saying.
approve of my life, but essentially they would frown upon what I was doing and not agree with it. And I would be reckless. And I would do that to get a reaction out of this cool, calm, collected person because I really was just missing the emotions. I was
Yeah.
such an emotional person. I wasn't necessarily getting what I needed from this person that I would act out in hopes of receiving almost any kind of emotion, even if it wasn't in a positive way. I just needed that dopamine fix. I needed something. And that unfortunately came down to also my own history with trauma, that I have a much, unfortunately, lower sense of what fear is and danger is.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me a really reckless person. And being reckless all of a sudden became my scapegoat to get reactions out of people. And in turn, in relationships, I would do really reckless things to try to get their attention when I felt like maybe I wasn't getting it,
Mm.
or I wasn't getting any kind of emotions or excitement out of
Mm.
maybe our regular day to day mundane tasks. And that didn't work in my favor.
No, it never does.
Uh, I had to learn a lot. But what it also taught my partner about me as a person is that it was a cry for help. It
Mm.
was some need wasn't really being met. And instead of me communicating it like I should have, because I didn't know how to say that, I didn't want to hurt their feelings. I didn't want to make them feel like they weren't doing a good job, like they weren't good enough. It was just me. I just needed something. I needed a little bit more. And I will never forget this proud moment that I had with myself where something extremely intense happened between my partner and I. And I literally sat with myself and was like, we're going to handle this one of two ways. We're going to handle this in a new way where you were actually going to sit and be calm and explain how you felt, and then give them a chance to explain how they feel and say, how are we going to solve this? Instead of, what are you going to do to fix this? How are we going to solve this? Or you can yell and scream, kick them out, and just never talk to them again and be miserable because is this fight worth losing potential years of happiness over?
It's a hard decision to make.
I had never done it before.
I'm
I
I'm the first
always
person. If I'm hurt, like you're out, you're done. Like I'm not a second chances type person.
I was the opposite. I gave like 10, 20, 50
Oh,
chances.
I can't do it. I've burned a
But I
lot of bridges
told
in my life though, so
but I told myself that this time was different. I told myself that I had been hurt so many times. I understood what I wanted, what I didn't want. And then it was an unfortunate circumstance that something happened where I was like, okay, well, you're at a crossroads. You've grown as a person. What are you going to do? I chose the sit down and actually have a conversation. I gave myself time though. I didn't do it immediately because I was too emotional and too heightened. I didn't want to say something I was going to regret and then ruin my devised plan of having a calm conversation because that would just be out the window. So I gave myself a couple of days to actually sit there, collect my thoughts, and basically like devise this plan of what was going to actually make this okay for me moving forward, but leave room because they did something and they acted out as a cry for help, like I also just did for years. So he's clearly doing it for a reason. What needs of his are not being met that he felt he needed to do this? So when
are
we
we
sat
talking about
down and
cheating?
actually
Do you mind
looked
me
at it,
asking?
no,
Oh, okay.
no, it would be a really long story. It's not cheating, but it is almost like a fragment of it that feels like
Like
it.
an emotional cheating.
Yeah, it's like this realm of like, can you call that cheater? Maybe. Can you not? Mm.
Like it's nothing physical, but they're putting energy into someone else, even though like nothing's being done.
And it ultimately comes down to lying.
Mm.
If you're going to do something that I'm going to disagree on and you're hiding it, that right there already is my red flag that you did something wrong and you know it's wrong and you're purposely trying to sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
So when we came and actually sat down and I was like, so like, let's actually talk about this. Instead of yelling at him, instead of confronting him in such a way where I was putting him down and making him feel stupid for his actions, I just said, do you want to be in this relationship? Yes. Okay. Then we need to figure out why you did what you did. And we can figure it out together. We can just talk. Because if you want to be in this relationship, I'm already all in. I've already come to terms with this and I want to talk it out with you. And I'm not going to reprimand you. And I'm not going to continue to punish you past this. But what you did was what I used to do. It was a cry for help. Something like your needs aren't being met. What can we do? What is your ideal situation and solution for this? What can we do together? What will be our solution? What do you want? And having that constructive conversation instead of just yelling at each other was the best thing we could have done for our relationship. And our relationship after that became 10 million times better.
Wow.
And I thought something like that was supposed to do the opposite. I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was supposed to break you. I thought it was supposed to push you away from each other. I thought that it would do all of these terrible things when it wasn't the actual problem. It was
Mm-hmm.
how we handled it and chose to respect each other and move forward and heal together instead of, well, I guess you need to go do your thing and work on that because that's all about you.
That's what usually happens.
Yeah.
And then people wonder why problems aren't getting solved and nothing changes.
And people avoiding hard conversations, you're not doing yourself any justice. Like, you are not helping the situation if you think that you can just ignore it and
Mhm.
eventually it'll go away. Have the hard conversations because maybe they're not going to go the way that you want it to, but maybe it could. Or maybe it's going to align you with the path that you are meant to go down with that person or without that person. But not having the hard conversations is going to wind up you full of resent and just being miserable and unfulfilled
Mhm.
and living every day like that, not just that problem. You're going to live like that every single day
And then
until
you're
that
gonna
problem
blow
comes
up
back around.
over the tiniest thing, and everyone's gonna be so confused.
Yeah,
You're
100%.
holding all that resentment.
100%. And I think resentment is the biggest relationship killer.
Because people wanna
Absolutely.
have these beautiful, deep, soulful relationships, but they're not willing to have, like, any real conversations or tough conversations. Because when things go wrong and you can have a conversation about it, that's when you start building connection.
100%. And I always kind of envisioned my relationship and eventual marriage as this deep sense of you are my person and without you I would be nothing. Like you are my life, you are the love of my life, and it would be this almost overwhelming fairy tale
Mhm.
basically. And when my relationship started to not reflect that, I was really able to analyze like, okay, so for some of my friends, that fairy tale, lovey dovey, I would die without you relationship works. That doesn't actually work for me. And that is so okay. I have more than okay with that now. I wasn't. I always felt like something was missing. I always felt like, well, why do they say like I love you 1,500 times a day, but like I maybe get it once a week? What's wrong
Mhm.
with me? Why is my
That can make you
relationship not like that?
spiral. It goes
It
back to the
can.
comparison.
Oh,
Comparing.
yeah. It's not healthy. And I really had to realize that even if I had that, is that meant for me?
Mhm.
Or would I
Will you
push
even
that
like it?
away
Yeah.
and just say that's not my definition of love. I don't need that. I don't want that kind of feeling because maybe that would suffocate me.
Mhm.
Maybe I do need a little bit of independence and I do need to be a little bit of a separate individual who I can watch you do your thing and I can do my thing. But whenever there is a problem, we're not going to do our separate thing. We know how to come together and we know when the time is that we really need to be two people and be against the problem instead of working on it individually and just think the other person knows what we're doing and telepathically they know how we feel. Like,
Mhm.
no, 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 no.
Have you been in codependent relationships before?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think I honestly didn't realize what it was at the time. And I kind of accepted it for what it was and thought it was normal. But I was in a very codependent relationship where it was the first time I was ever in love. And that kind of set the tone for the rest of the relationships I would have after. And breaking that was really, really, really hard. And when you're faced with a codependent relationship, you don't really realize what it is. Like, you don't realize that there's an imbalance in power, and you don't realize that you lose your self identity and you lose who you are. And then who you are just becomes who they are, and you kind of just like morph. And then you come out of that relationship and you're just like, who the hell am I, anyways? What am I going to do now? And losing myself like that, coming out of that relationship and basically having to start from scratch and be like, what do I actually like to do? Did I like that? Or was that because of this person showing me their interests? That was a very interesting process. And it took a really long time to actually navigate because you just feed off of your surroundings no matter where you are in life. That could be your friend group in high school. You're just feeding off of them. And You don't know who you are or what you like even then. That could be relationships when you finally start to have them. You just identify with your partner's friends. And what happened for me was every time I would get out of a relationship, I would lose that self identity and I would just be like, wait, who am I? And I always found that the only thing I could fall back on was I was a very vulnerable, honest, loving person. And that was what I had. And I never lost that through any of my relationships. I wasn't willing to compromise those things. But the second that I did in one relationship, I was like, no, I have crossed my final boundary for myself and lost myself so much that I just compromised the only thing that I have left, my values, and that no one can take from me, and I let them take it.
That's
So
tough.
I hit rock bottom in that
Mhm.
codependent relationship and was like, I need to get, how am I going to do that? How am I getting out of this? Like, I didn't even care how I was going to do it, but I knew enough was enough. It was like a light bulb went off in my head, and I finally realized that I didn't need to adapt to people to be likable or adapt to people to be loved. I could just finally figure out who I am. Someone would finally come along and love me anyways. I didn't need to shapeshift and become this perfect girlfriend for this guy who was just giving me a little ounce of love. So I was accepting it and morphing for them. I realized I hit rock bottom, and now, thankfully, a stable relationship is on the other side of it.
I resonate. I've definitely have shape shift for relationships before, and I tend to take on people's emotions a lot and
Mhm.
adjust to make them comfortable, and that's exhausting. Like hella
It is.
exhausting. Instead of being like, "No, you're in a mood. I don't need to be in a mood with you. Like I can still
Mhm.
be my own separate emotions, and that's
That's
okay."
hard.
It
That's
is
really
hard.
hard. It's hard to not want to also feel like you're being your partner's supporter by feeling for them. I find that that's what I used to try to do, like, to prove to them that I was so their person and I had their back on a regular basis. I would feel everything for them, and I would try to embody everything that they embodied, and I almost forgot that they also liked me and cared about me for me. They didn't wanna date themselves. Maybe some of them did, to be honest.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them actually wanted me to mirror them and just be them. But for the most part, people usually see something in you and they want you to be yourself. But when you try to become them and all of a sudden things aren't working in the relationship and there's friction and there's issues all the time, maybe it's because you're just not being yourself and you're not being true to who you are.
Well, I always think back to what attracted them to you in the first place. And if you feel like you're losing yourself in this relationship, bring yourself back to who you were at the beginning of that relationship or prior to the relationship. What was attractive about you? And embody those qualities again, you know? Like that's what's helped me. And for me, it's like it's independence. That's usually when guys like me, that's usually what they're attracted to is like, oh, she has her
Mhm.
own life and like doesn't need me. And then because I'm such a loving person and I can really like get connected to people, I can tend to go down a codependent route where I'm like, let's be a partnership, let's be us. And it's like, no, let's keep being independent. I'm like, and I have such a block where I think I can't have both, where I can't be this
Mm,
independent, attractive person, but also be in a relationship. And a lot of the times I feel like I'm leading a double life.
yes, that is so spot on. And I think it's also hard when you're kind of going through a journey of also just trying to heal and better yourself, where you want to go back and be like, well, why did they like who I was in the beginning? And you're even like struggling to find reasons. You're like,
Mhm.
okay, maybe it was this, but like probably not. And I think that was something for myself that I struggled with because I assumed that you had to heal as an individual. You couldn't be in a relationship and be working on yourself. You had to go into a relationship full force, best version of you, healed, ready to go. And I would almost stop myself and push people away because I'd be like, I'm not healed. I'm not, this perfect person yet. You're not actually going to like me when you get to know me. Stay away. But this relationship has taught me how much you can also just learn from other people and learn from the space that they give you. And the safe space that my partner gave me to figure out who I was and to really grow and to heal. If he never gave me that and I was constantly drowning in our relationship, so I didn't really have the room to grow or have the room to heal, I don't think we would have worked out.
Mm-mm.
And that's a really special relationship. And I guess that's why people always say you need to heal first before you date, because it's not that easy to come by. It's a little bit harder to find someone who's willing to hold that space for you, but it's not impossible. And I think that people automatically kind of just shut themselves out from that possibility. They aren't willing to even take a chance on certain people or relationships because they're not healed. They're not perfect, but you're never going to be 100% healed. And when you start to date someone, you're going to have uncomfortable feelings come up. You're going to have your negative patterns that you've been fighting for so long come up. And that person is just going to help you see those patterns and just be a little bit of a reminder of all of the hard work that you did do. And now, how are you going to face it? It's another learning curve, it's
Mm.
another additive to your healing journey. And I think partially why I resisted this happiness with this person for so long was because of that. I resisted so many years with him. Even the first full 2 years, I really, really resisted this relationship because I didn't feel healed. I didn't feel like I deserved this calmness and this peaceful, amazing life we could have together. I assumed I had to be healed and perfect before I would even be given this opportunity, before something like this would be in front of me. And I really had to fight a lot of self doubt. I had to fight a lot of negative patterns coming back up again, just being like, self sabotage. You got to do this. You got to run. You got to prove to yourself that you're right, that you don't deserve this, and have the cycle go again and be alone so you can work on yourself. And it's exhausting. How many times can you keep doing that? Why can't you take a chance and see what is in front of you and potentially grow and heal together?
Mhm. But we often self-sabotage because we know deep down we could have this beautiful relationship, but we're almost afraid.
Mhm.
The moment we
Oh,
start getting close to it, we're just like, "No, no, 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 no. No, 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 no."
it is scary. And I
Mhm.
think it's scary because it also kind of seems like the end. And when you think of that, when you think of, so this is it, like, if this is the end of dating, is this the end of fun? Is this the end of relationships and being maybe wild? And for someone like myself, that was also scary. I hadn't experienced a healthy relationship before in my life. So I didn't know what laid ahead. I didn't understand that you could have fun and still be wild, but still be independent and but still also be in a relationship. You could embody all these things. And that was terrifying. I kind of just looked at some people who were in solid, healthy relationships and I was like, well, your life is over. I'm still over here and I get to have fun and do whatever I want. I don't have to report to anyone. No one needs to know what I'm doing. But when I was single, I was still really sad.
Yeah.
And I almost wanted to still do all of those things.
But I think it gives people a lot of power, especially women listening, to know that you can have both. You can have your independent, fun life, but also be in a relationship.
Yep. And I'm blown away with how respectful and how much room to be myself every single day my partner gives me.
Mhm.
It's not even like a second thought in my mind. If I wanted to go away for a weekend by myself or with the girls, I don't need to sit there and think of, "Oh, no, am I allowed to do this?"
Right. But before you thought you would have if you were in a relationship.
Yeah, I had to. I have to
Yeah.
justify why I deserved a weekend away away from them
That's a
or
toxic
away from the
relationship.
now looking at it and seeing that I get to have my independence and I get to have this great relationship to come back to, I'm like, this is what I've always wanted. This to me, this isn't the end that I used to think was coming. I used to think of being in a serious relationship was like an impending doom and your life was over. Now I get to have it all. I can book a girls' trip and we could go on vacation and come back, and I would be able to sit there for hours telling my partner, and he would be sitting there laughing with me, joking with me about it, and asking questions and genuinely caring. And saying this all out loud, even right now, I'm like, whoa, that is so cool. That is my life. That is amazing. I have come this far and I get to experience that.
It brings a new appreciation for your relationship.
It does. I am so grateful.
Mm.
I try to tell him so often, but after this podcast, I'm telling him again.
Right? Well, Dani, before I let you go, one last question for you. You've given a lot of relationship advice in this podcast. And obviously, the nice thing about the advice you're giving is like, it's clear you're still going through it. And it's clear that nothing's
Mhm.
perfect. And it's clear that tomorrow you might have an argument or might be a down day. Like, who knows? But over the course of your relationship, in your current relationship so far, what's one piece of advice that you can give to someone for a fulfilling relationship? Not boring.
I think that it reverts back to still being able to kind of act like a kid and not losing your sense of adventure and wonder about the world and each other. That is going to take you incredibly far. Laughing together is just as important than crying together and being able to go through those hard moments. Can you also have lots of joy and laughter and still kind of act like idiots together and be able to laugh about it at the end of the day? And I think the more that I see the people around me grow up as well, that is what they want the most out of a relationship when they're single. It's what they strive for. They just want someone at the end of the day that they can laugh with and have fun with. And it doesn't mean that it always needs to be exciting. It doesn't mean that you guys are laughing and screaming and having a good time. You don't need all of those crazy high moments to be laughing. So, can you revert back to sometimes being kids and being silly together? I think that is important for keeping a relationship fulfilling on a daily basis. Can you guys go to the grocery store and accidentally knock something off of a shelf and create an avalanche of avocados and laugh about it? Yes. Or will the person be mad at you and be embarrassed and just be like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe I'm here with you right now? Those two
Too
different kind of
much.
tones are going to set the rest of your relationship, the rest of
Agreed.
the tone for your relationship.
Because
And
then
it's,
you, as the person getting reprimanded, is going to be afraid to, you're going to be walking on eggshells all the time. You're going to be afraid to have fun and not be yourself anymore.
yeah. So don't downplay the small laughs that you
Mm,
have on a regular basis, I would say. It
agreed.
is so much more important than you realize.
Agreed. Laughter is the best medicine.
Mhm. It really is.
Before I let you go, can you please plug your podcast and where everyone can find you and just give everyone a quick idea of what your podcast is all about?
So, I started causing friction because I really needed to let this other emotional side of me out. And so what it does is practice mindfulness for millennials. It kind of teaches us what to do with all of these really big emotions that we have on a regular basis. We talk a lot about mental health, we talk a lot about trauma and healing, and it's all about just living in the present moment instead of being in our anxious thoughts or kind of sitting in our depressive patterns that we have. And you can just find it on all major streaming platforms, Causing Friction.
Dani, thank you so much. I knew I was going to be excited for this episode because it's fun talking to people my age about the same crap that I'm going through. So it's just so relatable, which I always want to emphasize in this podcast. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.